Thank you to the students as well as to Dr. Ray Scampavia for being here today. I'm excited to listen to this wildlife topic webinar on opportunities and challenges for pollinator habitat on solar farms. And our guest speaker is Dr. Ray Scampavia. She is an invertebrate ecologist who works as a biologist for WRA Inc. Her PhD research assessed the impacts of agriculture on native and managed bee reproduction in the California Central Valley. Currently, she conducts surveys for protected invertebrates and plants, maps and assesses potential threats to sensitive habitat, and supports a variety of projects requiring invertebrate expertise. She also conducts pollinator habitat assessments and monitoring and provides design and enhancement recommendations for projects with pollinator habitat components. She has taught courses and led trainings on pollinator habitat design, enhancement, and monitoring in professional and academic settings. And before she starts, I just wanted to say we'll leave all the questions to the end. So please write down your questions and keep them in mind for Dr. Scampavia. And then at the end, we would love for you to say your questions out loud, but you're also welcome to put them in the chat. So thanks again. And Dr. Scampavia, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Anna, for the invitation to speak today. I'm really excited to give this presentation to all of you. And I'm just going to queue up my PowerPoint. Let's see here. So does that look good?
Yep, we can see the first slide.
Okay, perfect. So thank you once again. And today I'm very pleased to be presenting about or discussing opportunities and challenges for the creation of pollinator habitat on solar farms. And also I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that I've learned through my work designing vegetation management plans for pollinator-friendly solar in the state of California. First, I'm going to be talking about something that I call the solar farm paradox, which is trade-offs between the increasing utilization of solar energy with food production and environmental impacts. I'm then going to talk a little bit also about, for the purpose of this presentation, what exactly is a pollinator? What do they do? Who are they? Why are they important? And so on. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the trends in legislation that we've seen surrounding this pollinator habitat on solar farms and some of the benefits of planting pollinator habitat on these solar farms. During the second part of my presentation, I'm going to be talking about some of the basic design principles of creating and maintaining pollinator habitat on solar farms, and also some of the unique challenges to pollinator habitat creation that solar farms present. I'll be focusing this presentation on my work with solar farms in California, for which my company has been contracted to assist with meeting some power purchasing agreement requirements for pollinator-friendly habitat. And so let's begin with the solar farm paradox. These black rectangles that you see here are photovoltaic solar panel arrays. And this landscape that you see here is something that's called a solar farm, which is basically a configuration of rows of these photovoltaic solar arrays that are used to generate utility scale levels of electricity. And these solar farms right now are currently at the nexus of energy, food, and environmental issues in the US. On the energy side, solar farms are one of the leading means to decrease carbon emissions currently, which reduces our dependence on fossil fuels and can help alleviate the magnitude of climate change. Solar energy is predicted to become the dominant renewable energy source worldwide by 2050, and the US is currently leading the world in solar energy production. According to the US Department of the Interior's calculations, to keep the US on track for net zero carbon emission goals with our current technology would require a tenfold increase in current solar energy development, which translates to about 3 million hectares of land conversion in the US. These solar farms require large swaths of relatively flat and open land. And so therefore, the best places to put them are typically in agricultural fields that have been created within historic prairie and grasslands. At least in the US, it's estimated that about 80% of future solar farms will be developed on former agricultural land. So this gets to some of the potential downsides of these solar farms. The conversion of land that is used for agriculture to solar farms is going to increase pressure for food production on remaining agricultural lands. And this has also led to an increased opposition to solar energy in rural parts of the US. Furthermore, to reduce maintenance, traditional solar farms have removed all of the vegetation from the area under and around the solar arrays. And this area is either left bare or it's covered in gravel or replanted with non-native turf grass. So these solar farms, these traditional solar farms have pretty low ecological value as well. So in summary, I'm sorry. So yeah, these areas have low ecological value. There are also environmental quality issues because there's decreased biodiversity in these areas. There's decreased carbon storage capacity, issues with water quality and erosion, and also the lack of vegetation combined with the reflective properties of the solar panels themselves can actually increase ambient temperatures around the solar array, which leads to something called the heat island effect. And finally, construction of the solar farms themselves can also result in mortality of wildlife and other environmental impacts. So we have these environmental quality issues, we have increases in ambient air temperatures, and also these are just not very attractive looking installations. So all of these issues have led to increased public opposition to the development of new solar arrays as well. In summary, the benefits of decreased carbon emissions through the creation of traditional solar farms comes at the cost of food production and ecological value. But in the past decade, academics, legislators, and the solar industry have asked, why can't we have both? Why can't we have our renewable energy targets met, offset cost food production, and increase in ecological value? And I realize that maybe I'm dating myself a little bit because this right here is a very famous commercial from when I was a kid for Old El Paso salsa, in which this girl says, why don't we have both? So that's what that is, in case anybody was wondering. So again, we have these pollinator-friendly solar emissions, which are a potential way to decrease carbon emissions through the production of these solar farms, while also offsetting costs to agriculture and increasing the ecological value of the area around these solar farms. So now that I've talked a little bit about some of the trade-offs with solar energy and solar farms specifically, before I start delving into the specifics of pollinator-friendly solar farms, I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about what pollinators are and why they're important. Angiosperms, or flowering plants, are currently the dominant plant form on Earth. And this is a cross-section of a flower, and we see these stamens are the male reproductive part of the flower, which produce pollen. And this part in the middle here is the ovary, or the female part of the flower. And we have down here an ovule, which once it's fertilized will produce seeds. So pollination is basically the transfer of the pollen, or the male reproductive unit, to the stigma are the receptive part of the female reproductive unit, resulting in the production of delicious developed plant ovaries. So these ovaries will then develop into fruit, and which we eat, and which support wildlife as well. It also translates to seed production, so it is vital to plant reproduction as well. So this is an important part of the food chain. It's an important part of food production for humans, and it's also vital to plant reproduction. There are different types of pollination, which I'm going to demonstrate using these two little flower icons here. So one type of pollination that we see in a lot of plants is self-pollination, and that's where the pollen comes from the stigma of one plant and it's deposited on the stigma of the same plant. So in this system, a single plant can reproduce, can fertilize itself without any additional plants nearby. On the other hand, we have cross-pollination, which is where the pollen from one plant lands on the stigma of another plant. And therefore, in this instance, at least two plants are required for reproduction. And there's a pollination spectrum for plants. So some species can actually reproduce entirely through self-pollination. Others, like avocados, can only reproduce with cross-pollination. And most plants fall somewhere in between the two. So they may benefit from cross-pollination, but they're able to self-pollinate. Some plant species like pines and grasses are wind pollinated, and that means that they basically just produce a whole ton of pollen, broadcast it out there, and hope that some of it lands in the right place. However, most angiosperms or flowering plants have evolved to rely on animals for pollination and cross-pollination. And the huge benefit for animal-mediated pollination is that the plants don't have to produce as much pollen because pollen is very costly to produce. It's really high in protein. And the animals can act as specialized carriers between plants of the same species. So this increases the chance that the right species of pollen will get to the right species of plant stigma. And in many cases, flower traits such as size, shape, color, and time of day that the flower opens can indicate what type of animal pollinates it because they've co-evolved these relationships with their animal pollinators. However, it can be there are some potential costs to animal-mediated pollen as well, because the animals are visiting these flowers in order to eat. They're either getting nectar, which is the sugary substance that's produced by the flower, or they're eating the pollen itself. So there is some cost to this animal-mediated pollination, but it is a very common system of pollination, and so it's clear that it benefits the plants as well. And there, as I alluded to earlier, there's a whole host of different types of animal pollinators. This is not an exclusive list that we have here, but we can see birds like hummingbirds. I couldn't find a good picture of a bat, but there are bats who pollinate plants such as saguaro cactuses in the Mojave Desert. We have wasps, flies, butterflies, and moths, who we're learning more and more that moths are actually unsung pollinators, and they do quite a bit of pollination, more so than butterflies, believe it or not. We also have beetles and flies again. Flies are also very important pollinators. But bees are the main contributors to pollination worldwide. And so I have here in this slide photos of bees. And believe it or not, these are all photos of bees that were taken in California. And many of you may be most familiar with the European honeybee up here on the top left. And that's largely because humans have developed this relationship with honeybees. We cultivate them and manage them commercially for honey production and crop pollination. But believe it or not, European honeybees are actually not native to the US. They originate from Eurasia. And there are over 20,000 species of bees worldwide. in addition to the European honeybee. And just for a little bit of context, there's only about 5,000 species of mammals worldwide and 10,000 species of birds. So there's twice as many bee species in the world as there are bird species, and about 4 times as many bee species as there are mammals. So there are about 3,500 species of bees in the US and around 1,600 in the state of California alone. So bees are just a really diverse group of pollinators. Um, so I guess I should have put my pictures of the bees here to illustrate my points, but I'll just talk a little bit about some of the diversity that we see in bees. Bees can really vary a lot in size. Some are only the size of a tiny little ant. Some can be almost the size of a golf ball. Some look more wasp-like, while others can be very round and fuzzy and cute, like bumblebees, which are one of my favorites. They can be blonde, they can be metallic green or blue, yellow, striped, black. They also vary a lot in their behaviors. So there are some species that will only visit one type of flower, such as sunflower specialists in California that will only visit sunflowers. But there are also some that are more generalist and will visit a lot of different types of flowers. Some bees are solitary, meaning there is only one mother bee per nest, and all of the offspring in the nest are the offspring of that one bee. Whereas others can be very social, and at the sort of the extreme end, we have the honeybee, in which there's a queen who produces daughter workers that are taking care of the entire hive but not reproducing themselves. And periodically, they will also produce drones or males and future queens, which will mate and start another colony somewhere else. There are even some parasitic species of bees. So I'm going to go back to the last slide. Can you see my cursor? I'm circling a sort of grayish wasp-like looking bee on a yellow flower, and it actually has a smiley face on its back, which you may or may not be able to see. So this is Trioepiolus. This is a cuckoo bee, and the females of this species do not even create their own nests. They basically find the nest of a sunflower bee underground and lay their eggs in that nest and have the sunflower bee take care of their young. Okay. So all female bees have pollen transport structures on their bodies. So this is a little striped sweat bee here, and you can see that she has a kind of fuzzy leg. And those hairs are actually electrostatically charged so that pollen will cling to them. And these transport structures allow bees to really efficiently carry pollen. But the type of transport structure that bees have varies between groups. So some have really fuzzy legs, some have hairs at the bottoms of their abdomen, some even will carry the pollen inside of their crop as opposed to on the outside of their body. Bees are also vary in terms of when they are active. So for example, bumblebees tend to be active starting in February. You'll see the queens emerge and start looking for nests, and you'll see the workers flying throughout the season until the fall. Whereas there are some species of bees, such as the vernal pool mining bees, that are only active for maybe 2 weeks out of the year. Bees are such important pollinators in large part because they've actually co-evolved with flowering plants. So the oldest positively identified angiosperm fossil is about 130 million years old, but the oldest known bee fossil is 100 million years old. And it just so happens that 100 million years ago is when we saw this rapid explosion in flowering plant diversity. And it was also at that point that flowering plants rapidly became the dominant plant form on the planet Earth, which they still happen to be today. So bees have actually co-evolved with and facilitated the evolution and the dominance of flowering plants on the planet Earth. Pollination plays a vital role in natural functioning ecosystems, but why should humans specifically care about pollination? So in this slide, I call pollination an ecosystem service. And ecosystem services is a phrase that is used to relay the benefits that the natural environment and healthy ecosystems provide to humans. The term was actually coined to reframe the way that humans value the natural environment. And these ecosystem services can include things like decomposition, water purification, carbon storage, and of course, pollination. So in addition to playing this key role in natural communities, it's estimated that about 70% of the world's major crops benefit in some way from animal-mediated pollination. It's estimated that about 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we eat is the result of pollination. And by the way, it's actually usually the tastiest and the most nutritious parts of what is on our plates. For example, about 90% of the human supply of vitamin C comes from animal pollinated plants. The whole quality of lycopene and the majority of plant-based lipids, vitamin A, calcium, fluoride, and folic acid are also coming from animal pollinated plants. Believe it or not, the dairy industry also relies on animal pollinators because alfalfa, which is used to feed dairy cows, is produced through pollination of alfalfa flowers. A study that came out in 2009, so this is $2009, and it's probably much more today, estimated that the value of pollination was about $186 billion worldwide per year. So pollination is important for natural systems. It's also very important for human food production as well. Pollinator population trends vary by species and by region. And to be honest, more than 99% of insects have not been studied in terms of their population trends. But we do have some information about how pollinators and insects in general have been doing in recent years, and the picture isn't looking great. It's estimated, based on what we know, that insect abundance is actually decreasing by 1 to 2% each year. And in the US, almost a third of butterfly species are at risk of extinction currently. Additionally, about a quarter of North American bumblebee species are also threatened. And these declines in insects, these declines of pollinators, have led to the degradation of pollinator networks and the structure and function of the role that pollination plays in ecosystems. There are a lot of potential causes of pollinator decline. There's not really one culprit that we can single out as what is driving these declines. Things like climate change, parasites, nutrition, habitat loss, pesticide use, overwintering stress, and invasive species are all synergistically impacting pollinators and contributing to these observed declines. So that was a little bit of a detour there, or a big bit of a detour, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about what pollinators are and why they're important to give some context for these pollinator-friendly solar initiatives. So because we took that big detour to talk about pollinators, I'm going to go back for a second and just remind everyone about what I was talking about at the beginning of this presentation with the solar farm paradox, where we've got solar farms being an integral part of our current plan to decrease carbon emissions and battle climate change. However, these solar farms typically have low ecological value and can result in the loss of agricultural land. And because of this, there is also can be a fair amount of public opposition to the construction of new solar farms. So pollinator-friendly solar initiatives have become an increasingly popular way to balance these issues with solar farms. And in 2016, Minnesota became the first state to pass legislation promoting the development of these pollinator-friendly solar sites. Since then, 6 other states have also followed suit and developed their own pollinator-friendly solar initiatives. State legislation typically provides guidelines and definitions for how to designate pollinator-friendly solar farms, along with a scorecard that's used to assess pollinator habitat quality. So The sites are scored based on the quality of pollinator habitat, and a minimum score on that scorecard is required to receive a pollinator-friendly designation. Now, the onus of pollinator habitat creation, maintenance, and monitoring falls on the solar farm owner and operator, and typically at least 3 years of post-construction monitoring is required. There are other states that have not developed legislation that for pollinator-friendly solar initiatives, but have developed partnerships between state agencies, universities, developers, and nonprofits to provide similar guidelines and scorecards. In 2022, Marin Clean Energy became the first California power purchaser to announce a pollinator program requirement for the purchase of power from solar farms. So in order to get a contract with Marin Clean Energy, solar farm owners must receive a pollinator-friendly designation for newly created solar farms. And I have an example here of some of the categories from the Marin Clean Energy scorecard. So solar farms need to get a minimum score of 80 out of a max of 168 points to fulfill the contract requirements for the power purchasing agreement. And there are different categories pertaining to pollinator habitat quality for which they can score points based on their vegetation management plan. Now, this is something that I just learned about, and I don't have a lot to say about this right now, but EPRI, which is a nonprofit, is currently working on a Be Better certified electric program. And this is different than the pollinator scorecards. So there are basically a series of management and planning requirements that the solar farms need to meet. And the idea is to have something that is nationally consistent, that's third-party verifiable, so somebody other than the solar farm operator, EPRI, and the the organizations that have helped to make these guidelines can verify that the solar farm qualifies to participate in this certification. And the guidelines are trying to balance inputs from both industry and scientists. So right now, there's only a draft version of this Be Better certified electric program, and it's in the pilot phase, but this may be a more standardized way to look at pollinator habitat on solar farms nationwide. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the potential benefits of these pollinator-friendly solar farms. And I have to say a lot of this is very preliminary because this concept is so new. It's the first state to roll out an initiative was in 2016. So we don't have a lot of long-term studies on this topic. Pollinator-friendly or friendly solar farms tend to be more aesthetically pleasing than traditional alternatives. You know, there's these beautiful flowers, there's greenery, and that can really generate positive press. This combined with environmental benefits can actually help decrease public opposition to new solar farms. And this is also appealing to the solar farm owner because it can really streamline the permitting process and make the construction of the solar farm less costly. Additionally, pollinator-friendly vegetation can potentially reduce ambient temperatures under solar panels caused by the heat island effect. And this can actually increase solar panel efficiency and translate to further economic benefits to the solar farm owner. There's already a lot of evidence out there that creating pollinator habitat in agricultural areas can improve pollinator visitation and pollination of crops, which can lead to this direct economic benefit for farmers. For example, there was one study that was done in Central California in an area with a monoculture crop system that found if a farmer spent $4,000 investing in planting pollinator habitat, this planting could actually pay for itself within 7 years by increasing populations of beneficial insects and pollination rates to crops. And just a couple of months ago, one of the first studies of the effects of pollinator-friendly solar on pollination was published. This was in Minnesota, and there was a 5-year longitudinal study during which the researchers found that the creation of pollinator habitat on solar farms actually tripled the abundance of beneficial insects and also increased pollination visitation to adjacent soybean fields. Another study that modeled ecosystem services in the Midwest found that when compared to a traditional agricultural system, pollinator-friendly solar farms actually increased carbon sequestration and water retention and decreased sediment export or erosion. In addition to improving species richness and abundance of beneficial insects, many of the qualities that make good habitat for pollinators also benefit other wildlife, such as birds and small mammals. So, for example, this is a burrowing owl, which is a very cute protected species in California. And the habitat requirements for burrowing owl can actually be quite similar to what you would find in pollinator habitat. Pollinator-friendly habitat can also create refuges for both pollinators and other wildlife within agricultural monocultures from harmful practices like the use of agrochemicals and frequent ground disturbance. And as the footprint of solar increases, it's possible that these pollinator-friendly solar farms could actually function as dispersal corridors for wildlife, connecting suitable habitat. So now that we've talked about some of the benefits of these pollinator-friendly solar farms, I want to also talk about what makes good habitat on solar farms. And the basic design principles for these pollinator-friendly solar farms is actually pretty similar as pollinator habitat restoration in grassland, because a lot of these areas are converted from historic grassland. So these basic design principles that I'm going to talk about are also reflected in the Marin Clean Energy Pollinator Scorecard. And this is going to be a very surface level exploration. There's a lot of research that's been done into what makes good pollinator habitat. And if you have questions, I encourage you to reach out to me or reach out to Anna. And I'm more than happy to provide more information about this. First and foremost, different pollinators visit different types of flowers. So having a diversity of flowering plants is really important. Typically, we prefer native flowering plants because native invertebrates have actually co-evolved relationships with these species over time. And our restoration design team at my company uses a variety of resources to determine plant suitability to the region, to the microclimate, and also in terms of attractiveness to pollinators. Oh, sorry, going back, some of the things that's important to look at for diversity of flowering plants. You want flowers that are different sizes or they're different shapes, different colors that bloom during different times of the year. And again, native plants are preferred, and local seed or seed that has been harvested in the same region is even better, because those species are locally adapted to the climate conditions in that area. For all of our projects where we're creating these vegetation management plans, when we are putting together our seed mix palettes, it's really important to consider the different microclimates that are present within these solar arrays, because we have these areas that are partially shaded between rows, and then we have areas that are fully shaded underneath the solar arrays themselves. And different plants perform better in shade versus partial shade. So we will typically have, for the solar array itself, two different plant palettes, one for between the rows and one for under the rows. And a lot of these solar arrays are going up in areas converted from agriculture. So the seed bank that is already present, seeds that are already present in the soil, is typically almost entirely invasive species that will really aggressively take over if they're not managed. Oops, excuse me. I didn't mean to do that. So it's really important to make sure that we are treating invasives, especially in the first few years of plant establishment, to allow those native plants a fighting chance to establish within the site. In the photo on the left, this is a photo, I think, of the Carrizo Plains super bloom in SoCal, and it looks gorgeous. We see this huge abundance of these flowering plants. This photo was taken in the early spring, and this area is quite dry. So even though it looks like beautiful pollinator habitat in the early spring, it's possible that by the fall, there will be nothing flowering in this area. However, as I mentioned before, different pollinator species are active at different types of years or different times of year. Some species, such as solitary bees and butterflies, might only be flying for 2 to 4 weeks, while others, like bumblebees, might need flowering plants from as early as February all the way through November. Therefore, it's really important when designing these plant palettes for these solar farms to make sure that there are multiple flowering species at any given time of the year. So this chart is a really simplified example of what a planting palette might look like for a solar farm. These are all flowering species that are attractive to bees, and the bloom period is indicated by these green cells. So you can see here that the way that this seed mix has been planned, there's at least 2 flowering plants at any given time during the pollinator flight season. So there are not only plants that are available throughout the season, but there's redundancy there as well. This photo on the left is the current buffer area outside of one of the solar installations that I'm working with. And as you can see, there's a lot of room here for improvements for pollinator habitat. There can be limitations to what can be planted within the solar array due to fire restrictions, watering, like irrigation issues, and also taller plants can shade the solar panels. So planting a vegetated buffer around the site provides opportunities to create more nesting resources, including planting woody and perennial species, and to provide some variation in vegetative structure to create a wider array of microclimates. In addition to planting flowering plants, solar farms are also scored on the availability of nesting and reproductive resources for pollinators. So here we have some examples of some potential reproductive resources for pollinators. Native bunch grasses, such as this one here, can provide nesting habitat for bumblebees within the hollows underneath the drooping blades of grass. So bumblebees could nest in areas like this. Things like leaf litter or woody debris can also provide overwintering habitat for pollinators that nest in the duff. Here we have an example of a bee box. So this is wood in which holes of a variety of different diameters have been drilled, and there are some bee species that will nest in these pre-existing cavities. Also, some scorecards will give additional points for planting native milkweed within the site. This is because native milkweed is the host plant of the monarch butterfly, which is an imperiled and very charismatic pollinator species. However, it's really important to consider where we use milkweed when we're planning these, our planting palette, because monarchs have, in California, monarchs tend to breed inland and then they overwinter on the coast. So we don't want to plant milkweed along the coast where the monarchs are supposed to be overwintering. And finally, especially in areas that are very hot and dry in the summer, such as California, these perennial clean water sources that are free of chemicals can be a really important resource for pollinators and other wildlife alike. Since a lot of these solar farms are being constructed in areas where there is a lot of active agriculture, they can provide chemical refuges for pollinators and wildlife as well. So in addition to the direct effects of pesticides on pollinator populations, even herbicides and fertilizers and fungicides can affect pollinator behavior and reproduction. So solar farm owners can earn additional points on their scorecard by communicating the need to reduce and eliminate pesticide drift from adjacent growers or adjacent farmland to the solar farm where the pollinator habitat is located. In this last section, I'd like to discuss some of the unique design and maintenance challenges that we have encountered when we're designing pollinator habitat for solar farms. As I mentioned previously, these solar farms can get incredibly hot due to the heat island effect, and they're often located in annual grassland or adjacent to active cropland, so areas where fire safety is extremely important. And here on the left is a bird's eye view of a solar farm located outside of Tonopah, Nevada. And temperatures at the solar farm actually got so hot that there were over 130 recorded instances of birds literally catching fire while flying over the facility. So these solar farms are at extreme risk from a fire safety perspective. And fire safety is of utmost importance to these solar farm operators, especially in fire-prone areas such as California. So for the projects that we have been working on, there are very strict vegetation height requirements, which really limits what we can plant. Taller vegetation, as I mentioned earlier, can also shade panels and reduce efficiency. So we have to find plant species that are not only heat tolerant, but they're also shade tolerant, and they can tolerate mowing. So we have to opt for a lot of really short-statured and disturbance-tolerant plants. As I also mentioned, weed management is a huge issue for these sites that are converted from agriculture. And in California, there's typically a huge invasive weed bank in these grassland areas that need to be controlled so that weeds don't just take over after the native seed is planted. Due to historic uses, soils in these areas may also have increased nutrients levels and disturbed soil profile, which can also give these weeds a little bit of an upper hand against the natives. And also one interesting challenge that we've encountered is that the height and the spacing of the solar array panel rows can actually limit the types of equipment that we can use to manage invasive weeds. So typically, if we were trying to restore grassland in California, one way we might deal with the seed bank is we would wait until the spring when the seeds start to sprout, just mow everything down, wait for the next flush of growth, mow all of that down. And we might do that for 2 seasons to try to knock down the seed bank before we even attempt to plant. But that's just not really possible at these solar sites because the heavy-duty mowing equipment can't get between and under the solar arrays. Also, based on what we saw when we were trying to source our seed, there is a real trade-off between what's widely commercially available and what is locally adapted. And also because we wanted redundancies in species planted, since some species might fare better than others, we really did run into this issue where the cost of the locally adapted seed was challenged compared to these widely commercially available species that might not necessarily be locally adapted. One way that we tried to get around this is by looking for seed collection opportunities in the vicinity of the solar farms. So in addition to assessing habitat, when I do my initial site visits, in addition to assessing the sites themselves, I would try to poke around in the vicinity to see if there were any areas of native grassland where we might be able to collect local seed as well. So this talk really focused more on the context and the design stage of creating pollinator-friendly solar farms, specifically in the state of California. But looking ahead, there are a few areas where I am looking forward to opportunities for improvement and further research. First of all, nearly all of the studies and the guidelines that I found during my literature searches focused on the Midwest and in Europe, which have very different climates in California. California tends to be cool and wet in the summer and in the winter, and extremely dry and hot during the summer. I'm hoping that there will be some more studies in the near future that focus on the Western US. And also, as this idea becomes more popular and we see it being implemented more regularly, I'm interested in seeing more longitudinal studies on some of the potential environmental benefits of these pollinator-friendly solar farms, including for other wildlife species. And finally, as we have more research published and we have more experience in the state of California, I'm really looking forward to developing some California-specific guidelines for habitat design and management. So thank you again for the opportunity to present today. And I would love it if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask me. I would just, yeah, I just love to hear from all of you now.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I do have a couple questions myself, maybe so that the students have time to think of the wording of their questions. I was curious if you had any concerns of safety for pollinators in solar farms since they get so hot.
Mhm.
And I think you might have mentioned safety of birds was a concern. So curious if that was a concern for bees in particular.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is I'm not exactly sure. I do know that, well, first of all, that solar farm where the birds were catching fire, that was in the desert. So it was a even more arid environment than a lot of these grassland areas where we're installing pollinator-friendly solar in California. Also, there has been research that has shown that this pollinator-friendly vegetation can actually reduce ambient temperatures underneath the solar panels. So my hope is that that will help offset some of these the heat that is generated from the albedo effect in the solar farms. And then also, if you are thinking about where the majority of the heat island effect is concentrated, a lot of it is if it's due to the reflective properties of the ground and the solar panels. And so if the reflectiveness of the bare ground has been reduced or eliminated due to planting vegetation under the panels, then really it's the area above the panels that's going to be most affected by the heat island effect. So I'd be more concerned about birds, I guess is what I'm trying to say, than things
Okay,
that
yeah,
stay
it sounds
closer to the
like the
ground. Mhm.
sounds like the pollinators would stay closer to the flowering plants below, and the temperature down there would be lower because of the plants.
Yes, exactly.
I
Mhm.
see, thanks. I see Jovita has her hand up.
Yes, that was a very impressive presentation, Ray. I want to thank you so much. I appreciate all the new things I've learned from your presentation. One question I have, it's so remarkable, the research that you have been following and contributing to on pollinator-friendly solar initiatives. I was wondering how well is this science or research known in terms of it being promoted or advocated to the decision makers who authorize these renewable energy projects? I'm thinking like the California Energy Commission and the
Mhm.
County Board of Supervisors, especially where there's a strong nexus with agriculture and how that increases crop pollination
Mhm.
of pollination, um, because I think that could really be an important factor in approving a project for the added benefits as you reviewed with us. So I didn't know if this
Mhm.
information that you're providing to us is getting out there to all the different state, local, and regional agencies.
That is a very important point, and it's unfortunately it's not my area of expertise. I would hope that it's something that, is going to be gaining more traction and more publicity. Um, at least that's my hope. I will say that one drawback of a lot of the legislation around pollinator-friendly solar, even in this the few states where their legislation has been enacted, is that there's not really like any sort of enforcement component to the legislation. So it's more voluntary. It's something that's voluntary on the part of the solar farm owner. Now, in contrast to that is Marin Clean Energy here in California, which is not a policymaker. It's a private company, but they are actually requiring this pollinator habitat component um, for their power purchasing agreements. So I think I'm hoping that it's something that's going to be getting more publicity, both with power purchasers and with policymakers.
Yeah, because I can also see added benefits from all the native plants that are being created at these solar farms to attract other species like amphibians and reptiles and birds.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
There's just like this growing kind of biodiversity that could be a result of all of that.
I absolutely agree. I think that's a really great point.
Any questions from folks who either want to unmute themselves or type in the chat? And say if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. I see a question in the chat from Leah. Can the heat island effect of solar farms impact nearby residential areas?
That's another excellent question. And I will start by saying that I'm not an expert on the heat island effect. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but I believe that the answer is yes, because this is an issue that came up when I was doing some research for an unrelated project that was looking at potential effects on of development, proposed development within a county. And one of the things that we looked at was ambient temperatures in adjacent areas. Also, when I was looking into some of the potential benefits of these solar farms, one of the things that was coming up was this idea that part of the reason that landowners adjacent to the solar farms would be opposed to the solar farms was because of the increased temperatures.
Great, thanks. We still have a few more minutes till 5 o'clock. If people have any more questions, feel free to go ahead. I have one more question. You touched on the effectiveness of different pollinators, or how different pollinators pollinate in different ways. I was wondering if you could talk more about what makes different types of pollinators more or less effective at pollinating different plants.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, as you know, I'm biased towards bees because I studied bees for my graduate degree, but also I think just objectively bees tend to be the most abundant and most efficient pollinators. And for the bees here, let me see if I can find a nice slide. I don't know if I have any great pictures. Well, here, I'll share this types of animal pollinators slide again, if I can figure out how to do that. Let's see here. It has to do with these electrostatic hairs that they have on their bodies. So give me 1 second to share my screen again. And thanks for bearing with me. I feel like a little bit of a Luddite today. Here we go. Can you see my slide with the animal pollinators?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So you can see on this slide a lot of these, well, this fly is a little bit fuzzy, but a lot of these pollinators are have pretty smooth bodies. But the bees actually have, I don't have any great pictures here. I guess maybe this one's a good one. They have electrically charged hairs and specialized pollen transport structures. So the pollen is actually jumping off of the stamen onto the bee, and it's clinging on through electrical charges, and that is allowing the bee to actually carry large amounts of pollen from they're not necessarily intentionally carrying pollen between the plants. They're trying to carry it to the nest to feed the offspring. But through the process of collecting this pollen and moving from flower to flower, they are pollinating more efficiently. Now, if we go back to this slide, when I was saying that moths are kind of unsung heroes of pollination, there's a couple of reasons for that. We typically think of butterflies as being pollinators because they're really charismatic, they're beautiful. We have a lot of research out there on butterflies, but they actually have like not super hairy bodies, and their legs can be pretty long. So they're actually perched up on top of the flower. Whereas moths, on the other hand, they're cute, kind of fat, they're very fuzzy. So they're just kind of dragging their bodies along the flowers, and they're picking up the pollen and carrying more pollen between plants. And also, moths are active at a time when there's really not a lot of most other pollinators are diurnal, whereas moths tend to be more crepuscular or nocturnal. So they're actually providing pollinator services around the clock. It's instead of 9 to 5 pollinator services, now you've got 24/7. So that's why I'm so saying that moths in particular are becoming, we're starting to recognize that they're more important to pollination than initially thought. And also let's see if I have another good picture. The structure of some flowers is really specific to the type of animal that pollinates it. So for example, here, you can see these purple flowers have sort of bilateral symmetry. They're shaped kind of like this. So that the large bodied bee can grab onto the bottom and orient themselves into the plant. And I don't have a picture here, but actually alfalfa, which is bee pollinated, the stamen are actually spring loaded. So when the bee lands on the plant, it triggers a spring and the stamen actually hits the bee on the back. So the behavior and the size and shape of the pollinator plays an important role in whether or not they're able to pollinate as well.
Great, thanks. I know it's almost 5 o'clock. Do you have a few more minutes to answer some other questions that people have?
Sure.
Okay, great. And if people have to leave at 5, that's okay. But Malia asked, could you go over what parasitic species of bees were once more?
Mm-hmm. So they're sometimes called cuckoo bees. I don't know if you're familiar with the cuckoo birds, but it's a similar concept, and basically it is species of bees. Most bees, they create their nest. They have the mother will or the workers will go out and collect pollen and nectar to feed the young within that nest, and they create some sort of architecture for the young within the nest, like the comb of a honeycomb, or little cells in the ground, or little capsules of leaves that are woven together, whatever the case may be for that species. But cuckoo bees or parasitic bees are basically cheats. They don't go through the trouble of collecting pollen, and they don't go through the trouble of building their own nest. They'll basically wait until the mother leaves and sneak in and just lay their own eggs inside of the mother's nest. And then the mother comes back, assumes that they're hers, and she'll feed them, and she'll create the little nest structure for them, and so on. And so there are actually a fair number of bumblebee parasite cuckoo bees, and for those the cuckoo bumblebee will lay the egg in the nest, and basically the queen and the workers are all spending time raising the cuckoo larvae into adults. Mm-hmm.
Wow. We have one last question from Samuel. Is it possible to develop pesticides that don't harm pollinators?
That's another great question, and I should say that there are a lot of different types of pesticides out there, and the effects that these different classes of pesticides have can really vary depending on the class. So there's typically there's some that are considered less I'm blanking on the word, like damaging
Toxic.
to what's that?
Toxic.
Yeah, less toxic, right? The effects are not quite as severe on pollinators, and that typically gets tested actually during the pesticide registration process. But they only test them on European honeybees, and it's usually acute toxicity that's being tested. So it's like if you directly expose the honeybee to the pesticide, what happens? Does it die? As opposed to like, well, what are the cumulative effects if it's getting it in the pollen versus the nectar versus the nesting material, and what are the effects of reproduction? Those kinds of things tend to not be included on the label, but the acute toxicity to honeybees as a proxy for pollinators is typically included. And it's also really important when and how you apply pesticides if you're going to apply them. So, for example, there's a class of pesticides called pyrethroids, insecticides called pyrethroids, and they are they degrade really quickly in UV light. So the idea is if you're going to use pyrethroids, you use them before anything is flowering in the area. And then by the time that things are flowering and the bees are coming, the pyrethroids will have broken down. You can contrast that with something like neonicotinoids, which is a relatively new class of insecticide that is very long lived in the soil. And as the water takes nutrients, or as the plant takes water and nutrients up from the soil, it actually pulls the neonicotinoids into the plant, and it's present in all of the plant tissues, and it stays for a long time. So there's not really a bee that is visiting those neonicotinoid treated plants, or even plants that are growing in an area that was previously treated with neonicotinoids can be affected by those pesticides.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Well, thank you so much. Wendy says we all loved your presentation, and thank you so much for the information.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, so, and we are getting more thank you. So thank you so much, Dr. Scampavia. It was great to learn more about pollinators and the opportunities for their habitat in solar farms. And thanks to all the students and everyone for joining.
Yes,
thank
thank
you
you
as
so much
well.
for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it. I'm glad to hear that you all got something out of it as well. That's wonderful.
Very much. Thank you again, Doctor. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Bye-bye.
Bye.